Today's conversation will be with Jo Stobart, who is the Vicar of Ilminster and Whitelackington Benefice. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. Hello, Jo.
Hello, it's lovely to be here with you, V.
Yes, lovely to see you. I wonder whether you could, if you'd be happy to maybe just share a bit more about yourself and maybe share a bit about the context that you're in as well.
So I haven't been ordained all that long. So I was ordained deacon in 2016, having done part-time training in 2013. And if you're kind of guessing by my age, there's quite a bit of my life that went before ordination. So I've been a mum, full-time mum for quite a lot of that, but I've also worked in education for quite a lot of that time. So since ordination, I have worked in Bath and Wells, which is my sending diocese, and I served a curacy and a team benefice in the north of the diocese. And now I'm serving my first incumbency in the south of the diocese in a small market town, Ilminster, and a neighbouring village, Whitelackington. They're beautiful places. I'm really spoilt in where I live, and they're places that have a real strong identity as well. So that can be something that's quite different, having lived in suburbs, to be somewhere where people have lived all their lives and where generations of people have lived.
That's amazing. Thank you for that. One of the first questions that I always sort of begin with is, it's quite a big question. And the question is, what is your understanding of the priesthood?
So it is a really big question and a really good one. So I think when I came to ordination, so first thinking about those vocational conversations that if you're watching this, you might be in the process of having at the moment. I came from a tradition where priesthood wasn't really talked about. So for me, it was a really huge leap to try to get my head around what on earth this kind of sense of being in personam Christi meant, and, you know, and all of that kind of sense around even the Eucharist. So communion had always been important to me, but perhaps not as important, and certainly it's become to me now, or in the way that, if you like, there's that linkage obviously to priesthood. So it is a really dull answer that you're about to get, V, but my understanding of priesthood is pretty much what the ordinal says. And I think what's wonderful about the priesthood is that, as you know, we're ordained deacons first, so we never lose, hopefully, that sense of calling to people on the margins, that way in which the deacon bridges, you know, between church and community. But for me, my calling as a priest is very much centered on the church community and enabling the church to be that center of mission in its community and loving the community. So whilst I'm a part of that, what I see as a priest's role is to be that person who is enabling those people who gather on a Sunday to be fed and encouraged in that role of mission. And also I'm very much of a parish mode. So in other words, place really matters to me, and the sense that the church isn't just there, even though what I've just said isn't just there for the people who come on a Sunday, but serves the whole of its community. Yes. And that however fleetingly people might think about God, that they know that the church is there for them all the time, and that it has wide doors that can welcome everyone to be a part of it. That, you know, we don't have to have answered all the questions before we come into a relationship with God, but that everybody is welcome to know that this parish church is their home.
I love that, and I loved what you said about, you know, sort of enabling people who come to church on a Sunday, but also enabling those who are in the wider community as well. And I love that image. So thank you for that. And that kind of links in quite nicely into another question that I tend to ask, which is something along the lines of, what would you say from your experience have been some of the joys and challenges of priestly ministry?
So should we do the kind of the challenges first, because it's always good to end on an upbeat note. I don't think there's anybody in the Church of England who isn't experiencing that this is a tough time. I came into first incumbency just a few months before the first lockdown, so you know, a large part of my ministry here has been shaped by the experience of the pandemic, and then coming out of the pandemic, and the fact that many of our volunteers who were older had, if you like, 2 years where they stepped back from things and then actually realized that, you know, they were in their late 80s and that probably now was the time to hand things on to a younger generation, except that because perhaps we sat back with these volunteers who were amazing at what they did, we weren't thinking about who that next generation of people was. And so we now find ourselves in a situation where there are small numbers of people trying to do, you know, quite a large task, because we have, and rightly, huge responsibilities with regards to safeguarding and safer recruiting, and all those things that mean that we are functioning as an organisation in a modern world, not the kind of the Miss Marple world that we sometimes think that the Church of England lives in. So I think it's that challenge of resourcing, basically the human being resources, and the fact that as a diocese we're looking at what it means potentially to have less financial resource, and how that's going to work for the shape of ministry in this area. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge. For me, the joys are manifold. I really I get up every morning and I love the job that I do, the role that I'm in. There isn't ever a day where I get up and think, oh, I wish I was doing something else. I wish I had more time, but that's a completely different thing. So I think for me, again, it may sound very traditional, but the things that I value so much are kind of the hatching, matching, dispatching, the baptisms, the weddings and the funerals. You are with people in some really important bits of their lives, and they're people very often who are outside the church, and you get to have the huge privilege of showing the love of God to them in those places, and to letting them know that God does love them. I have one rule about most of those services that I take, and that is that by the end of those services, people will have heard that God loves them. That if they remember nothing else, that it is that God loves them. And, you know, that is a huge joy. And for me, as I said, I come from a tradition where the Eucharist hadn't been utterly central to my tradition. But for me now, the Eucharist is absolutely at the heart of where my faith is nourished, and the wonder of Christ becoming present to us in bread and wine. And so the privilege of presiding and celebrating with God's people at the communion table is just, you know, amazing. And the fact that through my stipend, people allow me to do this with my life. That, you know, these things that I love, preaching, teaching, you know, that's what I do, and I'm enabled to do that. And so that is something, is a deep joy.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh gosh, we could sit here all day and talk about this, get so excited. But really, just one final question. Do you have any words of advice for individuals who are, in a way, kind of exploring a vocation to ordained ministry, or any type of ministry, really?
Well, if this doesn't sound wrong, I think God is sneaky. So I suspect if you're exploring vocations, you're like, I'll just ask this little question, and you've thought it might be one step. And then what you will find is that one step leads to another, that God's picture is always bigger than yours is. And that as you go down that road, what you will find is it will have started like this, and it will just open out. And so I think my advice would be, read last Sunday's gospel reading, which was kind of Luke 9:51 to the end, and read about Jesus's advice to the disciples on the route to Jerusalem about, you know, putting your hand to the plow. And I do think that all of us in our calling, so this isn't just for ordained people, but for all of us, this is either everything or it's nothing. Following Christ is either something we want to give our lives to, or we don't. There are really, half measures aren't great. You know, God will work with that. But what really we should be doing is giving God everything that we can in response to that immense love that God has shown to us. And I heard somebody, so I think it was actually the Bishop of Eds and Ips on his kind of lectionary vlog, talking about how if you imagine Jesus's ministry as demonstrating the diaconate and the priesthood, the kind of the Galilee ministry is like the diaconate, but the journey to Jerusalem is like the priesthood. And I do think that the cross is what you have to have in mind. Obviously, we live, if you like, with the joy of the resurrection and the ascension, but that there is there is sacrifice needed, and we don't often talk about that. We don't talk about the cost of discipleship. But if the pattern of our calling is Christ, then that is what that calling is going to look like. And sometimes it will be hard and challenging, but there will be joy on the way as well.
Absolutely. And that's something that I'm recognizing in my journey as well. I mean, I'm not an ordained minister, but I am a Christian and living out my calling and my vocation with others as well. Jo, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been short, rich, straight to the point. I love that. So thank you so much. And hopefully I'll see you in person at the General Synod next month, I believe.
I look forward to it, Bea. Thank you ever so much.
All right then. Until next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.